Hello, I'm Ken Scher. I'm an executive coach and career coach, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about how to develop world-class leadership development on a shoestring budget. Before we get to that, I'd like to bring you back to a time that many of us might call the good old days. Remember, the economy was booming, businesses were doing very well, we were almost at full employment, everybody was seemingly happy in their roles, or at least making a good living and feeling good about things. And then, seemingly overnight, pop, that bubble burst and everything changed. All of a sudden, businesses were struggling. Many of them were closing. The economy took a big hit, and we found that the unemployment rate skyrocketed. And many of you are thinking about the pandemic and about how difficult a time it was immediately after the pandemic. And many of us are still struggling from that. And you might be asking, that was something that came out of nowhere. How could we possibly have seen that coming? Well, the reality is that we should have seen it coming. And great leaders in our company maybe didn't see the specific thing coming, but they knew to be prepared for whatever comes next. Because if you look back on history, go back to the 80s or 90s when the tech industry really started to come alive and people were investing in Silicon Valley. They were investing tons of money into companies that weren't even turning a profit yet. Hey, they were even investing in companies that didn't even have a product yet. And ultimately, that tech bubble grew and grew and grew, and then pop, that one burst. And businesses struggled, they're closed down, which led to a huge unemployment of some really talented people, which impacted the economy, which led to a lot of people struggling. But then, as with many cycles, things started to turn around and there was an uptick with the economy. And people started to get jobs again. Businesses flourished. The economy did great. And as people did better and better for themselves, they started to live the American dream, and that is buying their own home. And banks couldn't lend money to people fast enough. They loaned money to people without doing proper background checks. They loaned money to people without really taking into account whether they could or could not afford that house. And the housing bubble grew and grew and grew until pop, that one burst. And businesses struggled. People lost their jobs. The economy struggled. So while this pandemic had tragic consequences that the other issues didn't, it had the same economic impact that we've seen in the past. And the companies that did well, or at least survived, and maybe even did better than surviving, they're the ones that had the leadership in place that could handle this great change in the business world. And this is not something that's new. If you go back to the 80s and 90s when Wayne Calloway was the chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, he turned the company around. And he turned it around by focusing on leadership because he knew what the quote here is, and that is that the companies that were struggling, the companies that either were really having a hard time or maybe even didn't survive at all, they were the ones who didn't pay enough attention to developing their leaders to be able to handle whatever comes next. So I'm excited to talk to you today about how you can show your leadership the value of developing a leadership development program. And it all starts with presenting business value. When you're talking to leadership, when you're talking to finance about investing into leadership development, you need to talk their language. You need to talk about the business value that comes from it. You need to be able to identify the business needs and help them see that they're going to get a great return on investment when they invest in their leaders. And you're going to learn how you can partner with company leadership to uncover the resources and the opportunities to develop your leaders to be able to handle whatever comes next. Before I get into that, you may be wondering, who am I? Who is this guy? Well, I'm not him anymore. I can tell you that. I guess you can see for yourself that I've become this person. But I base my leadership on the 25 years I spent at Johnson & Johnson. I was in different sales and marketing leadership roles. I led the sales recruiting department for the United States, and I led 3 different sales training and leadership development teams at different operating companies in Johnson & Johnson. And throughout my tenure at Johnson & Johnson, I really feel very fortunate that I got leadership development as I grew up in the organization And then I led teams where we designed, developed, and delivered leadership development to different levels of leadership at Johnson & Johnson. Because J&J, besides Band-Aids and baby powder and maybe an occasional lawsuit and the vaccine, is known for leadership development. So I base my executive coaching and my training on what I learned there. And what I learned there, the number one thing I learned is that there is a value, how important it is to develop trust with all the stakeholders that you do business with, both internally and externally. And the gentleman on top of this, the top picture, General Robert Wood Johnson, one of the founders of J&J, he knew that from the beginning. And he wrote what's called the Johnson & Johnson Credo. It's a one-page, four-paragraph document that outlines the responsibilities that the company has to key stakeholders. The first paragraph is about the responsibility to the healthcare providers and their patients and customers that they serve. The second paragraph is about the responsibility to employees and to providing a safe work environment and fair compensation to those employees. The third paragraph is about the responsibility to the communities that we live and work. At Johnson & Johnson's not just there to take, but to give back to the community as well. And the fourth paragraph is the responsibility to the shareholders. Now, the reason why that's so interesting to me and important is because at the time it was written, Robert Wood Johnson was the only shareholder. But he knew that if he put those other three stakeholders in front of him, it would take care of him and he would get what he needed and wanted from the company. And the Johnson & Johnson Credo is what serves as the roadmap to some of the biggest decisions that J&J ever makes. For example, the Tylenol scare. Many of you may be familiar with that. At the time, the gentleman in the bottom picture, James Burke, he was the chairman of J&J. And for those of you who may not recall, there was a time where somebody had tampered with Tylenol and people died from taking it. A few people around the world died from taking Tylenol. So J&J and James Burke led a discussion of the leadership team, and they turned to the J&J Credo, and the first responsibility was to healthcare providers and their patients, and they decided that they were going to pull Tylenol from the shelf all over the world at the cost of millions and millions of dollars, because Tylenol at the time was the #1 pain reliever in the world. But J&J knew that their success was based on their healthcare providers and the patients and customers having trust that they were going to get a good, safe, effective product. And they maintained that trust by pulling the product from the shelf, and when they put Tylenol back on the shelves in the first ever tamper-resistant bottle, it quickly became the #1 pain reliever again. And that's because trust is critical to leadership. Trust with your employees, trust with the company, trust with the marketplace and your customers and clients. And J&J knows that, and that's one reason for their continued success. And I believe so strongly in trust that I developed what I call the trust success model. I believe that trust is the foundation of all great relationships, and great relationships are the key to business and personal success. And in this trust success model, it's an acronym, because what great model is not an acronym? And trust for me stands for transparency. It's about being open and honest with what's going on. Think about the Tylenol scare. J&J didn't hide behind it or try to defend it. They accepted it. They were transparent that we have a problem, but we're going to fix it. So being transparent with your employees gives them the opportunity to take advantage of opportunities, but also to handle challenges as they come, because they have all the information they need, because you're not hiding things from them. The second part of the trust success model is about results. And it's not just about end results, because clearly those are important, but it's how you get to those results. Do you have milestones along the way where you're checking in and course correcting as needed, and coaching and giving feedback to the people delivering those results? We used to say at J&J that you might get the end result you were looking for, but if you left bodies in your wake along the way, that was not a successful project. The U in the trust success model stands for understanding. And it's understanding the people who work for you or in your company. What are their goals? What are their aspirations? What are they looking for in going to work every day? It's understanding the marketplace and the business that you have as well. But when you focus on understanding with your employees and what they're doing, you again will build that engagement and that loyalty that really can help with employee retention and engagement, as I mentioned. And that's probably one of the things that is probably contributing most to the great resignation. Why people are leaving is because the company doesn't understand or acknowledge the needs of the individuals in the organization and the organization as a whole. The S in the trust success model is about simplify. It's a crazy world we live in. There is so much going on, but great leaders are able to clear the deck and get rid of some of the clutter that comes into us every day and help their people to focus on what's really important, keeping it simple and just, again, looking at the priorities properly. And finally, in the trust success model, the last T stands for team. And really you need two types of teams to be successful. One is your personal team, your family, your friends who will be there to pick you up when things are down, help you celebrate when things are going well, help you forget about work for a while and really enjoy your life. And then there's your professional team, your network, people you connect with that help you with your professional development, that help you drive your business, and that help you with your career management. So when you address all 5 of these things as a leader or as a leadership team, you'll find that you will build trust. And trust, as I mentioned, being the foundation to great relationships, will lead to those great relationships leading the company to being successful, even more successful. So what does great leadership do? Again, this is not rocket science, but it's important that you're not just using logic or telling your leadership, no, we need a leadership development program because it makes sense. You need to build a good case. So leadership delivers alignment on business strategy. How many times, I mean, I wonder if you asked your different leaders in the company, what's our focus? What's our key strategy or top 2 or 3 strategies? Would you get alignment? Do all the leaders have the same vision, the same mission that they're working on? The great leadership also delivers the ability to execute. You might have the greatest plans in the world, but if you don't have the leaders that can lead their teams, that could course correct, that could give the feedback and the coaching needed to execute that plan, it doesn't matter how great the plan is. So you need great leaders to be able to execute. You need great leaders who could identify what are the needs of the company so they can find the right people, put the right people in the right seats on the bus so that they can get the work done in the way that needs to get done. And great leadership, in the end, will help your company deliver on their goals and objectives for that year, for years to come as well. So why don't we invest in leadership development? Why don't we invest in improving leadership? Logically, I can't imagine anyone could argue that it doesn't make sense to have great leadership in a company in order for the company to perform at its best. And I think often the number one reason that comes back is we can't afford leadership development. We don't have the money. We need to invest in this sales program, this marketing program. We don't have the time to invest in leadership development. That's often what comes back. But there's a cost to not developing your leaders. When you don't develop your leaders, you're going to see increased onboarding costs and maybe even more onboarding costs because, as we all know, onboarding is one of the main reasons that contribute to employee longevity. So a poor onboarding because the leader was not engaged or involved or didn't know what was going on can lead to increased turnover, which obviously is going to cost you and your company more money. Poor leadership leads to a lack of communication, which can lead to misalignment, which could lead to people not being on the same page, not knowing what the company's top strategies or priorities are. And if everybody's not moving in the right direction, in the same direction, the company's going to be limited in the success it can have. When you don't have good leadership, as we all know, you get a lot of turnover. Often, the number one reason people leave a company is not because of the job, it's because of their leader. So if you have poor leadership, often it manifests itself in high turnover. High turnover is very costly, as we all know, to a company. Poor leadership leads to a lack of innovation. When people don't feel like they could take chances or be creative or try something different, then they're just going to come in, do their job the same way every day, and ultimately over time, any success that you have is probably going to level out because you can't keep doing the same things over and over. At some point, you have to adjust, you have to change in order to continue to accelerate your growth. You're going to miss opportunities with poor leaders because they're not able to see the future and they're not able to see the landscape and where there are opportunities they can take advantage of. And poor leadership leads to an inability to take advantage or to address business needs. Because even if they see what those needs are, they're just not capable and not able to take advantage of or to handle those business needs as they come up. But how do you identify business needs? Because again, you can't talk generally to your leadership and say, we need leadership development because it makes sense. You need to talk in the terms that business leaders, that finance people want to hear, what speak in their language. So you need to identify business leads. So ask yourself, what are the company's objectives or goals? Do we know what they are? Are they clear? Do our leaders know what they are? And are they able to address the needs of the company to achieve those objectives and goals? You could ask, what's the opportunity that we have to save money or to make money? And again, do we have the right people in place with the right skills and competencies to lead our organization to take advantage of these opportunities to make money or to find ways to save money for the company? Another question to ask is, what are the problems or solutions that are being suggested and considered? And we might have a great solution to a problem, but if we don't have the right people to lead us to take advantage of that solution, to use that solution to address that problem, then again, it doesn't matter. You need to have the leaders in place that can not only come up with these suggested solutions, but also then be able to execute on the plan to take advantage of them as well. And finally, what are the skills or the experiences or behaviors that we need our leaders to have so that they will be able to be most effective in their leadership role? So if you ask these questions about your company, come up with some of those answers, you'll be able to go to your leadership and say, look, here's what I see. This is the goal we have of the company. But when you look at our leadership, here's where we're lacking. And if we address that, we'll be better able to reach those goals and objectives we have. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. So the way you do that is by developing performance metrics. You need to be able to, again, speak the language of finance or business leaders and show them how you can impact the bottom line and the profitability of the company. So the first thing to know about is leading and lagging indicators. A lagging indicator, is something that's already happened. You can't impact it because it's done. You get your sales numbers for the quarter. You can't change what's happened, although you might be able to change what's going to happen in the future. Turnover, it is what it is. You can't affect people who have left already, but you might be able to reduce the turnover rate. Now, the flip side of a lagging indicator is leading indicators. So you might see, for example, that, boy, our attendance is down. It hasn't impacted our business yet, but if we don't address it, it's going to. So how do you address attendance? You find out what's going on. Why aren't people showing up? What are the issues there? Sales call plan attainment. You might find that you need a certain number of sales calls on a specific type of customer. And if you see that data is not happening, then you could get leadership to say, okay, how do we address this? Do we coach our representatives on how to plan better? Do we do coaching on how to record their calls better? What is the issue? But once you have that leading indicator, you could then address it. So identifying the things you can impact and those things you can't will be important as you develop the performance metrics needed to convince leadership to develop a leadership development program. So when you look at what are the potential business needs that you could look at for your company in order to begin to build your business case, here's a list of them. And if you look at these are all pretty common. There are sales challenges, there are absenteeism challenges, and there's certainly turnover challenges. I'd like you to think of 1 to 3 of these issues that affect your company that you think, boy, if we address this business need or these business needs, and I can show my leadership how we can impact that this could make a difference in terms of them accepting my proposal to develop a leadership development program. So hopefully you've picked 1, 2, or 3 of these issues, because DDI and did a global leadership forecast in 2015, but really the numbers, there's no reason why these numbers would have changed over that time. And they found some really incredible outcomes. Look at how they saw the impact on these business needs by putting a focus on leadership development. You saw in sales coming in at 114% of forecast. You saw better operational efficiency by 42%, lower absenteeism, reduced turnover by 77%, the last one on this list. So how do you take this and make it personal to your organization, to your leadership? Well, let me give you an example. Let's look at turnover. If you consider, and these are just made up numbers, but 20% is a pretty reasonable number to think about in terms of turnover. And if you have 50 employees in your company who make an average of $50,000 a year, the average cost of replacing those employees, and there are a number of different ways to look at it, but the most often way that I saw was 1.5 times the salary. So it would cost $75,000 to replace a $50,000 a year employee. Now, if you look at that, 20% of the 50 employees is 10 employees. So it would cost $750,000 to replace those 10 employees. But as DDI showed in their study, if you can focus on leadership development in order to create a more engaging environment, a more motivating environment that keeps employees motivated, excited, and wanting to be with the company, you could reduce turnover by as much as 77%, which is nearly a $600,000 return on investment. Just whether that investment is time or whether it's money, you can get that back because an effective leader can help reduce the turnover rate. So you can see if you're talking to a finance person or a business leader and saying, hey, I could save you almost $600,000 depending on what your numbers are, that would be a pretty good argument for them to say, yeah, okay, let's do that. It's a good investment because the return is great. So we really need to change the paradigm. It needs to change from we can't afford a leadership development program to we can't afford not to have a leadership development program. Because again, as Wayne Calloway from PepsiCo said, that those companies that are in a life and death battle for survival, those are the ones that probably didn't pay enough attention to developing their leaders. So how do you develop them? What kind of investment does it take? Well, you certainly can invest a lot of money if you want to, but you don't have to. You have the resources now. In fact, I did some research and there are 6 leadership assessment tools online that are either free or less than $100 each. So you could use these to help identify what are the areas of development that your leaders need to address the business needs of your company. Very inexpensive, a great way to develop a baseline of your leadership development needs. I've developed, along with my trust success model, a trust diagnostic. Maybe trust is the issue. Maybe there's not enough transparency and employees don't know what they have to deal with, what information they can use, and where the company's going. You know, maybe any part of the trust model might be impacting the performance of your company. So this diagnostic can help you determine whether, in fact, trust is the issue or any aspect of the trust success model is impacting your leaders. And then lastly, not lastly, but there are a number of things you could do, again, that don't cost any money. You can have your leaders lead internal projects on different groups or different subgroups, different teams, get them exposure in different areas so that they can be coached and get feedback and developed in those areas that they're going to need as they progress their leadership with the company. You could develop a mentoring program. You could have one leader shadow another leader or attend different leadership meetings. When I was in development as a representative, for example, I would go to district level meetings and even region level meetings to get the exposure there, to get comfortable with being in that environment, to be able to contribute in that environment. Not only did it help with my environment, with my development, but it helped other leaders see where I was at and actually, I believe, helped accelerate my career growth. So these are all ways you can develop your leaders that don't cost money, they do cost time, but the return can be great for your company. Other ways you could develop your leaders. You can send them to courses at different universities. You could send them to leadership conferences where they could attend different seminars and programs to develop themselves. Networking, both internally to your company and externally to your company, can be very effective in developing your leaders. Leaders volunteering in different roles at different organizations is not only good for their soul, it's not only good for a good reflection of the company, but it gives them experience in other areas that they might not get with the company. And then certainly you can invest in executive coaching. And executive coaching can help on a number of different levels, not the least of which is providing an objective view of a person's leadership and allowing them or helping them to develop and grow in the areas that they need to grow in. So as I start to wrap this thing up here, I would say to you that really it all starts with trust. As I mentioned, I believe that trust is the foundation of all great relationships, and great relationships are the key to success, both on a personal, professional, and company level. And when you can develop world-class development on a shoestring budget by first talking about and proving the importance of leadership development to your leadership, developing those metrics that will show a great return on investment, and that you can implement it whether you want to invest money or time or both. You can develop a great leadership program. And finally, you really need to ask yourself in company leadership, can we afford not to invest in leadership development? And if we were live and in person, I would take questions from you now, but certainly, as I'm going to show you in a moment, I would love for you to reach out if you want to talk about anything or ask me any questions about this presentation or anything related to leadership development, or your own professional development. Because we've all heard that people are our most important resource. It's a very common term we hear from leaders, and it's hard to argue. And some leaders really believe it, and they invest in it. They invest the time and money, and they have a great prolonged program for leadership development. Some leaders start off being very into it, but then get distracted and off course, and they kind of leave it behind. And some leaders just never get around to focusing on it at all, even though they may know it's important. But one thing that I always find interesting is who said this first? Who was the first leader to say people are our most important resource? And you might be thinking of some of the great leadership development professionals that we've had, but I will tell you who said it. Pretty much every leader ever. And as I mentioned, some of them really mean it and do it. Some of them really mean it, but can't do it. So don't just go with the people are our most important resource. Put something behind it, whether it's money or time, to truly develop those leaders. So where will you be in 1 year? Are you going to be in a position where you say, boy, my leadership, they just won't come around, they won't buy into it, we all know we need it, but we can't get anything going? Or are you going to be able to look back and say, I developed the business case, including the return on investment, showed leadership the value of developing a leadership development program, we have it in place, and we're beginning to really make a difference in our leadership, which is really starting to impact our business. Where are you going to be 1 year from now? Make the commitment to make a change. Make the commitment to convince your leadership that now is the time to develop our leaders, to take advantage of what's in front of us now, and to be prepared for whatever comes in the future. So I would love to be able to share with you some of this information or to talk to you as well. So please reach out to me at ken@surecoaching.com. If you'd like the list of the online assessments, although you can take it from the slides you just saw, I'm going to share these slides with you as well. I have an e-guide to leadership development. It's based on the Trust Success model, and certainly we have the Trust Diagnostic as well. So please reach out to me. I would love to talk to you. You could see my email address here. Feel free to call me. We could connect on LinkedIn. I have surecoaching.com as my website. So many ways to get in touch. I hope we do get the opportunity to talk. Thank you very much for your time. Please reach out if you'd like to talk, and I wish you all the very best. Be well and take care.